Hi, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we're going to be doing lesson 7 in the book of Job, focusing on the chapters of Job 9 and 10. Last week we heard from Bildad, and I referred to him as Bildad the blowhard. It could be just as much Bildad the belligerent. In his opening statement, he basically said that God had killed Job's 10 children because of their sin. And it's like the danger of saying something like that is it would point to the fact that you've talked to God and God has told you this, because otherwise you're just speaking for him and you don't know what you're talking about, and that was certainly the case here. Bildad did not talk nearly as long as Eliphaz had, and maybe part of that was after that opening statement. If he looked at Job, he could probably tell Job wasn't listening any longer. That's the way it would have been if he was talking to me after a statement like that. But here we go. And now we see Job's response. Okay? So Job 9, 1 through 10, and the New American Standard Bible says this. Then Job answered, "In truth, I know that this is so. But how can a man be in the right before God? If one wished to dispute with him, he could not answer him once in 1,000 times, wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has defied him without harm? It is God who removes the mountains, they know not how, when he overturns them in his anger. Who shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble? Who commands the sun not to shine, and sets a seal upon the stars? Who alone stretches out the heavens, and tramples down the waves of the sea? Who makes the bear, Orion, and the Pleiades, and the chambers of the south? Who does great things, unfathomable, and wondrous works without number?" In this passage, Job speaks of the power of God, the powerlessness of man, the perfection of God, the imperfection of man, the worthiness of God, and the unworthiness of man. This great chasm that exists between the two. And then he talks about having a dispute with God. How is it with his imperfection, unworthiness? How is it he's ever even going to approach God? And so it points forward that if we're going to dispute with God, we need an arbitrator. And that arbitrator or mediator wouldn't be these hapless friends that have come to represent Job. Instead, think about it, the Old Testament always points forward to Jesus. So there's that interesting example of what's coming, and what's coming is a mediator. The interesting part to me also is that Job and his friends all have misattributed the cause of the suffering that Job is enduring to his sin. Even Job has fallen prey. He's listened to these words and he's thinking, well, maybe it does have to do with that, because he looks at the other sins he's done in his life and he hasn't suffered this level. So it's like, okay, what's different about this one? He doesn't really understand that. But points forward that need to go to God. We need that arbitrator or mediator. Arbitrator would need to understand the perfection of God and the imperfection of man. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? 1 Timothy 2, verses 5 through 6 in the New American Standard Bible says this. "For there is one God and one mediator also between God and man, the man Jesus Christ, who gave himself as a ransom for all, the testimony given at the proper time." So this made me think about something. A few years back on Christmas Day, I was driving and listening to the radio station, and they were playing an old broadcast by Paul Harvey, and he was always one of my favorites. And it was on Christmas, so he was telling a Christmas story, but Paul Harvey was talking about a farmer, and the farmer was not a believer, and his family were believers, and they had gone to a nearby church for a Christmas Eve service when the farmer stayed home. He didn't want to be a hypocrite because he didn't understand or believe in God becoming man and coming to earth. The whole thing just seemed just crazy to him. And he wasn't going to be a hypocrite and go to church, even though he wanted to be with his family. So he stayed at home by himself. And while he was home, he opened a door to do something, and a bird flew in. And this bird is crashing against glass and trying desperately to get out, and is just scared to death. And the farmer wasn't heartless. You know, he's trying to help this bird, and he's chasing him around the house, and he's trying to get him. And all of a sudden, it occurs to this farmer that if only I was a bird, then the bird would trust me and I could lead him out. I could show him the way out. I could show him the escape. And at that moment, the church bell started ringing and the farmer started crying, because for the first time in his life, he understood why Jesus came, why God became man, because instead of that huge separation between God and man, this, basically every person could have that approach to Jesus and see him as a man, and it would make us more comfortable and he could lead us out. And that's exactly, what happened. Okay. The difference between God and man is so great that even though God created man in his own image, that's an interesting part here, is that God creating us in his own image. And it makes me think about that. A lot of people, when they think that God created man in his own image, that it just is talking about we look like God, all right? And it might have some physical representation there as well, but I think it's deeper than that. If you look at Hollywood, all the Jesuses that they portray are always these blonde, blue-eyed Jesuses that look like they came from the United States rather than looking like a Jew from the Middle East. So it's like, image does have something to do with it. We also need to understand that statement made a couple times in Genesis about God making man in his own image. Here's one of those. And this one is from Genesis 1:26 through 27 in the New American Standard Bible. It says this: Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. First of all, notice that the verse speaks of God creating man in our image, not my image, our image. Do you think the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are identical triplets? It's like, it might be partially physical, but it might not have anything to do with that as well. The other thing I would look at there is that male and female were created in God's image. So I've known some people that you can look at and you really can't tell if they're male or female, even though there is a difference. But it's one of those things that if it was only physical. So to really understand this, we need to look deeper into the meaning of the Hebrew word for image. And it's Selim, and it's the word for image. All right. Here's an Old Testament verse using that word. So Psalms 39, 5 through 6. And I'm going to use the ESV, the English Standard Version, on this one because it translates it a little differently, and I'll explain that. It says, Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath, Selah. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. So the word there, the Selim, is the word shadow. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. In the New American Standard Bible, that word is translated as phantom, but then it has a little asterisk and it says, literally, this is image, okay? But a shadow is a great example here. A shadow is the resemblance or reflection of something greater. And that's a much better way of looking at it, us being created in God's image. We're a shadow or a reflection of something greater. And he's greater and we're his reflection, obviously. But back to our rock and the calm lake analogy, if we throw a rock, let's say that there's a glassy lake, and in that lake you can see a reflection. If you throw a rock into the lake, the water moves around, right? And it changes the reflection, but it doesn't change the one being reflected. And that's exactly what happens when sin affects us in our life. The reflection of God is altered, but God isn't altered, right? So as made in the image of God, so he made us to be sinless, right? We chose a different way, but he made us to be sinless. And he put us into a sinless world, and everything changed when man sinned, when man chose to sin. I think that's very interesting. All right? God does have that ability to restore us through his forgiveness, right? So it demonstrates the need for a mediator between the perfect and immense creator and his imperfect creation. Understand that God did not create us imperfectly. That's not the point of it. He made us perfect, but he gave us free will, and sadly, we chose sin. We followed Satan, who also chose sin. All right? Also, I want to think of God as creator. When we look as far as we can see what God created, but we know it's even farther than that. You know, it extends just forever and ever. But we also can look at the tiny aspects of God's creation. You know, if you study the human body and you see cells smaller than cells, things tinier than we could even find with an electronic microscope, basically, it all points to God's plan. And God is so immense. He's so huge, but he's made this incredible creation, and it's because of his purpose and plan. And we probably shouldn't say purpose, because purpose is singular. It's probably his purposes. Because if you think about how God makes every single thing work together in all our lives at the same time, God has many purposes, and the least we're going to be able to do is look through that little pinhole and see a tiny glimpse into understanding God's purpose. You think about even with this book, with Job, is that what's going on in Job's life, all right, Job enduring this suffering, it's not just affecting Job, it's affecting Job, it's affecting Job's family. Obviously, his children died, his wife has, told him to curse God and die. But it's also even affecting us, isn't it? You know, think about that. Is that we're reading the book of Job, we're understanding what he endured. So every believer that's ever studied and read the book of Job, the actions in Job's life are also affecting us. Job's speech about God's power highlights the creation around him. So there's another interesting aspect, is that Job points out Pleiades and Orion in verse 9. Interestingly, in Job chapter 38, God comes and talks to Job, and he brings up these same constellations. So I think part of the reason that God brings those up is to show Job that you said I wasn't listening, and I was listening. I was hearing every single thing you said. But there's another aspect of this that's very interesting. Stars by nature repel each other. All right, there are only limited places where stars actually are grouped together and they don't repel each other. Scientists only recently discovered this, and this occurs in two ways, in globular clusters and in open clusters. And both Pleiades and Orion are open clusters. They're very rare. We can see these Pleiades and Orion mentioned again in Job 38:31 and also in Amos 5:8. Let's look at those. Job 38:31 says, "Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion?" So these stars are bound together. And here in the first book of the Bible written, it points to that when scientists only have recently discovered that. Here's the one from Amos. "He who made the Pleiades and Orion and changes deep darkness into morning, who also darkens day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the surface of the earth. The Lord is his name." Amos 5:8. So Job continues. Job 9, verses 11 through 17. Again, reading from the New American Standard Bible. It says this: "Were he to pass by me, I would not see him. Were he to move past me, I would not perceive him. Were he to snatch away, who could restrain him? Who could say to him, 'What are you doing?' God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him crouch the helpers of Rahab. How then can I answer him and choose my words before him? For though I were right, I could not answer. I would have to implore the mercy of my judge if I called and he answered me. I could not believe that he was listening to my voice, for he bruises me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause." Verses 16 and 17 here are really important to me, where Job states his opinion that if he called out to God and God answered, that Job would not be able to believe that God was listening to his voice. All right? And again, we just pointed out that in chapter 38, God brings up exactly the same constellation that Job was speaking of, showing Job that, hey, I am listening to you. But my question is, do you ever feel that way when you're praying? Do you ever feel like God's not listening to me? Right? I know that I do. Sometimes I feel like what I ask of God is so unimportant and minuscule and potentially not in his will that, what's the point of my prayer? But God gave us this gift of prayer, right? He gave us this gift of prayer to build our faith, to keep us involved in the process where we could pray for someone else and see how it affected their life. But it takes us into the throne room of God. It allows us to communicate with our Creator. And we can't have relationship without communication, because communication builds relationship. It deepens relationship. And I think that all of us have those times where our faith wavers. Job certainly is going through one of these times right now. But it's at those times when it's most important to look back on the times in our life when we've prayed and God has rescued us. He's our tower of refuge. He's there for us. And we need to really focus on the fact that he's not going to leave us or forsake us. He's there for us and he is listening to us. And, certainly that there are answers to prayer that are no, and there are also answers that are not now. We need to just learn to trust him because it is part of his purpose. It's part of his plan. Job's focusing on his pain rather than his past. He's in the middle of all this pain. And certainly there's times in his past when he knew that closeness with God and he really, really needs to be focusing on that past. And then Job also speaks of God bruising him with a storm and multiplying his wounds without a cause, right? What storm is he talking about? Well, remember, there was a tempest that came in and the tempest killed all of Job's 10 children. God is attributing that storm Job is attributing that storm to God when it had nothing to do with God. God allowed Satan to do that. So the storm came from Satan, all right? But Job is blaming him and saying it's without cause, all right? So that's another part we need to understand is that without cause is exactly what we saw in the first chapter of Job. God gave Satan the ability to attack Job. And it wasn't based on Job's sin. It was without cause, all right? It had nothing to do with Job. So Job is enduring this without causing it on his own. And he's fallen into that trap where his friends are attributing this to his own sin. And Job's starting to fall prey to this and start to hear that, maybe I did cause it, but the difference is when reflecting on it, Job couldn't come up with another time in his life when he suffered like this. And he knows that he'd sinned before. So he's trying to figure out, what did I do? What do I need forgiveness for if I've caused this? God had a reason. And God's reason, almost all the time, this is part of God's reason, is he wants to draw us closer to him. That's one of those amazing gifts that God loves us so much. He wants us to be closer. And going through this, I was just thinking about the difference between Job's reaction and atheists of today. Is that when we're enduring difficult times, I look for the fight or flight reaction, right? And that's either if we're Christians, we either turn toward God or we turn far away from him. Sometimes we can go through something and we get angry and stupidly we turn away from God. But it's a fight or flight reaction. And as Christians, at least we have that choice. As an atheist, I don't know who you turn to. I don't know how you endure incredibly difficult times when all you have to rely on is yourself. All right? But we either run to God or we run away from God. And I've known strong believers that they'll have a child die and they abandon God. They run away from him. With one child dying, Job had 10. And even in the middle of this, Job still, he knows God. He knows him. He's not turning away from God, but he is angry and he's frustrated. And he's starting to fall into a lot of self-pity, all right? But, he said, though he slay me, yet I will praise him. That's one of his statements. And it's like, wow, that's amazing. even though it's not God that's slaying him. That's the thing we have to remember. He's becoming bitter because he doesn't understand the cause of this. The lesson is, again, he did nothing. All right, but he needs to trust in the Lord anyway. But to me, the biggest problem is that Job seems to be accusing God in this statement. You were doing this to me for no reason, right? That's getting a little bit dangerous, isn't it? Let's move forward. Finish chapter 9. So Job 9, verses 18 through 35 in the New American Standard Bible. He will not allow me to get my breath, but saturates me with bitterness. If it is a matter of power, behold, he is the strong one. And if it is a matter of justice, who can summon him? Though I am righteous, my mouth will condemn me. Though I am guiltless, he will declare me guilty. I am guiltless. I do not take notice of myself. I despise my life. It is all one. Therefore I say, he destroys the guiltless and the wicked. If the scourge kills suddenly, he mocks the despair of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. If it is not he, then who is it? Now my days are swifter than a runner. They flee away, they see no good. They slip by like a reed boat's, like an eagle that swoops on its prey. Though I say I will forget my complaint, I will leave off my sad countenance and be cheerful. I am afraid of all my pains. I know that you will not acquit me. I am accounted wicked. Why then should I toil in vain? If I should wash myself with snow and cleanse my hands with lye, yet you would plunge me into the pit, and my own clothes would abhor me. For he is not a man as I am, that I may answer him, that we may go to court together. There is no umpire between us, who may lay his hand upon us both. Let him remove his rod from me, and let not dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak, and not fear him. But I am not like that in myself. Job is wallowing in self-pity here. Again, he's pointing for that need for the mediator. But he's starting to accuse God. In verse 20, Job says that though he is guiltless, God will declare him guilty. All right, that's pretty close to calling God a liar. It's not a comfortable place when we begin to think God is wrong and we're right. I still don't think Job ever would have gotten to this place without his friends visiting and his friends blaming all that he's enduring on Job's sin. I don't think that Job would have gone into this self-righteousness and self-pity that he's involved in at the moment. All right, in verses 32 and 33, Job again points out because God is not a fellow man, Job cannot take him to court or accuse him. Every page of the Old Testament points forward to the New Testament, to Jesus. So if you ever want to see this, you have to study it, but look every single page of the Old Testament. You're going to find how it points forward to Jesus. And it might not say his name, but it's pointing forward to everything being fulfilled in Jesus. All right? So let's continue this in chapter 10. So Job chapter 10, so that would be verses 1 through 22 in the New American Standard Bible. I loathe my own life. I will give full vent to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend with me. Is it right for you indeed to oppress, to reject the labor of your hands, and to look favorably on the schemes of the wicked? Have you eyes of flesh, or do you see as a man sees? Are your days as the days of a mortal, or your years as man's years, that you should seek for my guilt and search after my sin? According to your knowledge, I am indeed not guilty. Yet there is no deliverance from your hand. Your hands fashioned and made me altogether. And would you destroy me? Remember now that you have made me as clay. And would you turn me into dust again? Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? Clothe me with skin and flesh, and knit me together with bones and sinews. You have granted my life. You have granted me life and loving kindness, and your care has preserved my spirit. Yet these things you have concealed in your heart. I know that this is within you. If I sin, then you would take note of me and would not acquit me of my guilt. If I am wicked, woe to me. And if I am righteous, I dare not lift up my head. I am sated with disgrace and conscious of my misery. Should my head be lifted up, you would hunt me like a lion, and again you would show your power against me. You renew your witnesses against me and increase your anger toward me. Hardship after hardship is with me. Why then have you brought me out of the womb? Would that I had died and no eye had seen me. I should have been as though I had not been, carried from womb to tomb. Would he not let my few days alone? Withdraw from me that I may have a little cheer? Before I go, and I shall not return, to the land of darkness and deep shadow, to the land of utter gloom as darkness itself, of deep shadows without order, and which shines as the darkness. When we think about the differences between God and man, there are just too many differences to discuss or understand. And Job talks about some of that here. Can you see me like a man sees me? Will your days be numbered like my days? Well, no, God's eternal. But Job does seem to not understand, thinking that he needs a mediator to go to God. This statement, he's going to God, he just doesn't know God's listening. That's the benefit of being a believer, is that we need that mediator. The mediator gave us access to go to the throne room of God in our prayer. But when we talk, God does listen. When you think about the just difference only, let's just pick out one. Let's say the difference in knowledge. God knows everything. All right? And if you think about the difference between the knowledge of Albert Einstein and his one-day-old infant, and the difference in their knowledge, the difference between us and God is way more vast than that. All right? I can't really throw stones at Job here. All right? Because I understand he's frustrated. I've been guilty of the same, of being angry at God for a situation that I'm in. And a lot of times the situation has to do with my own choice. And in a situation that I've put myself in. But then, I'll punish God. I'll be angry at God for not removing me from it, which is an interesting thing, is that, God gives us this free will and we have the right to make these decisions. And it's almost like we want God to protect us so much that he won't allow us to make a bad decision. It's like, okay, I want to do it my way, but if I do it my way and things don't work out the way I think that they're going to, then I'm angry at God for allowing him allowing it to happen. All right. God is not out to get us. That's the way Job kind of feels here, is that on the contrary, God has gone to the farthest extreme to have a relationship with us. He's not out to get us, right? He loves us so much, and God did not cause this on Job. Satan did. And part of it is us misunderstanding what happens on this earth with Satan having dominion and Satan's demons being here, and the spiritual battle that's going on all around us, unseen all the time. All right? I know many of you are enduring difficult circumstances. All right? But don't forget that God has a purpose and a plan. And again, I said this before, purposes. He has many purposes. So we're not going to find one purpose for each story. But if you think about, again, here in Job, who's being affected by this situation? Job's doing the suffering, right? And is it affecting Job's wife? Certainly. Bildad, Zophar, Eliphaz, all the people around the surrounding area who had grown to know who Job was and to see a righteous man. This is affecting them as well. But don't even lose sight of the fact of every single person that reads and studies Job can be affected by this as well. So this circumstance in Job's life has far-reaching implications. All right? And it makes me think a little bit about my sister Julie, who's just been enduring, physical difficulties for so long. And it just keeps on going. And you just kind of, I wonder if God was to ask Julie directly and say, Julie, would it be worth all of this suffering that you're enduring for one person to see your joy in the middle of this suffering that testifies of who God is, who I am. If he asked that to her, would it be worth that? If someone came to the Lord because of the suffering that you're enduring, would it be worth it? And I think most days Julie would say yes. There's probably going to be some days where she would say no, because you know what? It just wears you out. And the same thing we could see with Job is that Job wasn't getting any rest. He was just worn to a frazzle. The pain didn't go away. And even in this, there was, what was it? Verse 20, he said this, would he not let my few days alone withdraw from me that I may have a little cheer? He's even in that verse just asking for a short reprieve. And I know Julie's been in that spot too, where it's just like, oh, if I could just have a few good days, a few days where I'm not going to have to endure it like this. I think that all of us understand that there can be many, many, many levels of pain and suffering. And we look around and we see other people that aren't enduring, anything that seems to be that great. And sometimes, by looking at others and not keeping our eyes focused on Jesus, we can covet someone's life as much as we can covet their possession. But the point here is that we don't really know what's behind the scenes. When we're coveting someone else's life, we don't really know what they have to endure. God has a plan for each of our lives, and that plan is special and it's unique. And if God's going to put us in a hard situation, he's going to put us in shoes that'll carry us, right? He's taking care of us. He's not going to let go of us. And just in closing, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking of someone else that endured a really tough time. I was thinking of Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy, and they were in the Ravensbrück concentration camp, Nazi Germany, World War II. And actually Betsy died there. Corrie survived. And a couple of the things that, quotes from them just are deeply impactful. Corrie ten Boom said this, you can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. I think sometimes that's why God puts us in these situations where we're suffering, is that when we lose everything and all we have is to look to him, maybe it's that step that's necessary to deepen our relationship with him, to know who he really is in our life. He's everything. He's everything, right? She also said this, never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. We don't know what's going to happen, right? But we don't have to know what's going to happen if we know him. He is going to carry us through anything. He is the known God that tells us who he is and what he's going to do. We have to trust in him. And Corrie's sister Betsy, who died, said this, there is no pit deep enough that God is not deeper still. You can't run from him. You can't get away from him. Doesn't matter how bad it gets. God can reach you there. And he will. And he will if you just look for him. Okay? So the lesson here is to walk by faith, not by sight. All right? It's to trust God regardless of what we see, regardless of what we feel, regardless of what we experience, knowing who he is based on what he's shown us already, based on his word and the promises that he's given us, right? Based on who God is, his nature. So next week, we're going to see Zophar the zealot, who's going to take off the gloves and he's going to lay into Job. It's his turn finally. All right? God bless you from Mooresville, North Carolina. Keep it up. Talk to you next week. My Jesus, my Savior, Lord, there is none like you. All of my days I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength, let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to our King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I'll love you, forever I'll stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have in you. My Jesus, my Savior, Lord, there is none like you. All of my days I want to praise the wonders of your mighty love. My comfort, my shelter, tower of refuge and strength, let every breath, all that I am, never cease to worship you. Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. Power and majesty, praise to our King. Mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. I sing for joy at the work of your hands. Forever I'll love you, forever I'll stand. Nothing compares to the promise I have. Nothing compares to the promise I have. Nothing compares to the promise I have in